All right. So today we're going to be talking about the ABPP, American Battlefield Protection Program, grant project awarded to the Applied Anthropology Laboratories, or AAL, in the College of Sciences and Humanities at Ball State University for the purposes of further investigating the true boundaries of the Battle of Peckuwe in Springfield, Ohio in 2019. Forgot to present. Right. So a little bit about me. My name is Marianne Swartz, and I'm a senior here at Ball State. I've been working for the AAL for nearly 3 years. For the Battle of Peckuwe project, I participated in the fieldwork using a metal detector to find artifacts. I also participated in the lab work cleaning up the artifacts and analyzing them, as well as taking part in the report writing process. So the battle plan. First, I will provide a history of the Battle of Peckuwe for context. I will also explain how we conducted our metal detector survey, kept track of data, and conducted our lab work. Finally, I'll show you what we found during our field survey in Clark County, Ohio. During the course of the Revolutionary War, Ohio was home to a variety of Native American tribes, most prominently the Delaware, Miami, Shawnee, and Wyandot, and also the Ottawa and Seneca. Peckuwe was a predominantly Shawnee village situated along the Mad River, consisting of cabins, gardens, homesteads, cornfields, as well as a triangular fort. There were estimated to be around 1,200 residents in the town of Peckuwe and nearly 800 acres of cornfields. In 1777, the British provided weapons to their American Indian allies on the Ohio country and encouraged them to wage war on settlers in Kentucky to recapture their hunting grounds. Captain George Rogers Clark, leading the Kentucky County Militia, defended Kentucky against settlements against these British-funded American Indian raids. Detroit was the stronghold for the British and the center of their fur trade. Clark thought by capturing Detroit, the hostilities that were escalating as a part of the American Indian raids into Kentucky could be stopped. In 1778 and 1779, Clark began a campaign to march on Detroit, successfully capturing British forts in Kaskaskia, KOCOA, and Fort Sackville. However, Clark could not maintain enough men and arms to sustain his campaign to Detroit. In 1780, following his failed campaign to capture Detroit, Clark was authorized to plan an expedition into the Ohio country against the Shawnee and other American Indian inhabitants. This approach pleased Kentuckians, as Kentucky and the Ohio country had become the scene of increasingly deadly skirmishes and ambushes between the Euro-Americans and American Indian residents in the area. Clark gathered his troops, numbering nearly 1,000, and began marching from Louisville, Kentucky on July 24th. Shawnee scouts tracked Clark's men, and a skirmish on the Ohio River at Vevey, Indiana in late July left 9 of Clark's troops dead. By August 1st, Clark and his troops had crossed the river into Ohio. The Shawnee troops were a step ahead of the militia, abandoning the town of Shalagatha along the Little Miami River in south of Peckuwe on August 4th and 5th before the arrival of Clark's men. Most of those who fled from Shalagatha moved up to Peckuwe and to the north. Despite a lack of battle engagement in Shalagatha, Clark and his men burned the valuable supply of cornfields before continuing northward. On August 7th, the Shawnee leader Silverheels made his way to Peckuwe with additional troops, bringing the total number to approximately 300 men. In addition, Shawnee leaders were expecting around 150 additional soldiers from nearby Delaware, Seneca, and Wyandot communities the following day. After burning the cornfields in Shalagatha, Clark and his soldiers were halted by a nasty thunderstorm. As a result, they did not march on Peckuwe until the following day. On August 8th at around 2:30 p.m., Clark arrived at the Mad River with his militia approximately a half-mile south of Peckuwe. While Clark and his men were marching, the Shawnee leaders had evacuated the vast majority of women and children, as well as the new arrivals from Shalagatha, to a remote location. The scouts the Shawnee had sent out were delayed, so the advancement of Clark and his men caught them off guard, as they had not yet received their 150 reinforcements from surrounding tribes. From their vantage point downriver, Clark split his men into three sections or flanks. The center flank, that included the artillery, was to head directly toward the fort with Clark himself. The left flank went under the command of Colonel Lynn and Colonel Floyd, west and around toward the Shawnee villages. Finally, the right flank, under the command of Colonel Logan, headed east to cut off the Shawnee avenue of retreat. Clark brought a 6-pound cannon from Kentucky, and the men in the center flank fired on the triangular fort, leveling it. The 150 additional troops the Shawnee were expecting finally arrived in the late afternoon. Combined with the rest of the Shawnee force, the American Indians attempted to recapture the cannon but were unsuccessful. The Shawnee attempted to hide within the cabins and homesteads of Peckuwe, but their construction proved to be no match for the 6-pound cannon. The battle finally slowed to a halt around dusk, with the Shawnee retreating to the north. Their avenue of retreat to the north was still wide open, as Colonel Logan never made it past the Dolomite Cliffs to the east to cut off their escape. The next day, on August 9th, Clark and his men burned the 800 acres of cornfields surrounding Peckuwe. So much was destroyed that the Shawnee never returned to Peckuwe and instead opted to found a new Peckuwe further north on the Great Miami River. Overall, casualty reports conflict one another. The Shawnee reported 6 dead, 3 wounded, and 2 taken prisoner who were later murdered, and that they killed 48 of Clark's men, including 2 colonels. Clark, on the other hand, reported 14 dead and 13 seriously injured. He estimated that he and his men had killed and wounded 3 times the amount of the Shawnee force, but since they only found 12 to 14 bodies, they assumed the others were carried off during the night. In 2019, AAL at Ball State University teamed up with Dr. Lance Green, archaeologist at Wright State University, and Carol Kennard, executive director of the Clark County Park District, to further research the Battle of Peckuwe. The goal of this project was to conduct metal detector survey both on privately owned farms and land as well as park-owned land in an attempt to further define the boundaries of the battle by the discovery of battle-related artifacts. To do this, we set up transects 10 meters or approximately 33 feet apart. We walked these transects while slowly swinging our metal detectors parallel to the ground surface. We dug up each item our metal detectors pinged on. Most items were found no more than 6 to 10 inches below the ground surface. When we found something of interest, we recorded it. We recorded the find on field paperwork describing the artifact, how deep in centimeters it was found, and any other relevant information. We spent 24 days with a crew of 6 to 8 people performing metal detector surveys over 139 acres and 9 different parcels. Back at the lab, we thoroughly cleaned each artifact and laid them out on trays for analysis. As far as analysis, it was my job to find out what kind of metal an object was made out of. Sometimes that could only be broken down into ferrous or non-ferrous. Next, I identified each metal artifact as best as I could using a variety of reference books as well as online sources and the expertise of our team of archaeologists at the Applied Anthropology Laboratories. Finally, we put each of the artifacts in catalog order by type of artifact and labeled and bagged each artifact for curation. We had multiple ways of organizing artifacts, paperwork, and digital catalog sheets. Some select artifacts were then pulled from curation to be photographed for the report or used as part of public outreach programs. We gave many different outreach programs as a part of the grant project, including exhibit booths at the Fair of New Boston and Rock the Mad, multiple presentations to community groups, a public artifact identification day, and presentations to Clark County Parks Youth Archaeology Day Camp. For this project, we used a process called KOCOA Military Terrain Analysis, which is required by the National Park Service American Battlefield Protection Program. KOCOA analyzes the role that the landscape played in the battle. Categories include key terrain, observation and field of fire, cover and concealment, obstacles, avenues, and avenues of approach and retreat. Defining features include any key terrain, natural or handmade, that influence the battle strategy. The identification of these features helped to answer the questions of movement, location, and formation of both the American Indian Forces and Clark's militia. For example, the cliffs to the east were an obstacle for Logan and his men to the right flank and greatly influenced how the battle unfolded. All defining features identified were then entered into GIS data models and used to analyze and compare combatant strategies of the opposing forces. Maps and battlefield analysis are created for the report and for public outreach. Overall, we found many thousands of artifacts, but there were certain ones that caught our attention because they were diagnostic to the battle time period. For example, a total of 14 lead musket balls and shot were found. These were identified as musket balls and shot produced for American-made guns, consistent in location with the travel patterns of Clark and his soldiers. Many of these musket balls were warped or disfigured from previous firing through the barrel of a gun and possible ricochet off of other items such as rocks, trees, and even potentially people. In addition to lead musket balls and shot, we also found 20 examples of buckles in 3 different survey areas. Aside from 2, all of our buckles were single-frame buckles. Single-frame buckles were most commonly used on utilitarian objects such as harnesses and saddles. The 2 remaining buckles were examples of double-frame buckles, which were most commonly utilized on objects such as belts and shoulder straps. As you can see in the photos, these buckles vary widely in their condition and the degradation they faced while in the ground for nearly 240 years, but each one was a unique thrill to find. We found a large amount of buckles in the field that may have been in the general vicinity where Logan attempted to cross the river to the east. It is interesting to think that the action that must have been taking place for so many buckles to have been lost or pulled off packs, harnesses, and saddles. We were also lucky enough to find 3 knife blades from American belt knives. 2 of the examples are fragmentary blades, however, one of them is a complete blade with a fully intact tang and a simple design on the bolster. That first knife seen in the top left is more of a rounded blade, while the example on the top right more closely matches the shape of our intact blade. You may notice that the intact blade is deeper in color and shows more luster than the other 2 blades. Well, this is for a reason. Our intact blade was treated by electrolysis technology by Dr. Lance Green at Wright State University. Electrolysis stabilizes electrons in the metal so that they no longer interact with the molecules in the air, thus preventing the knife from further rust. And as far as the luster on the knife, after electrolysis treatment, a clear coat was placed over the surface of the knife in order to further preserve it from degradation. We also found a large cache of iron buttons with a single rectangular slit down the center. There has been some speculation as to whether these artifacts are buttons or beads or even some kind of homemade currency. We were only able to find one other example of a button that matches this typology, and that was from French colonial Cahokia. These artifacts were all found under a massive tree that may have been mature at the time of the battle due to its current size. For this reason, we think the tree may have been some kind of landmark and that the cache of buttons under the tree were possibly meant to be retrieved in the future. So what do you think they are? There's no wrong answers in speculation. Personally, I don't see these artifacts as buttons, but I don't really know what else they would be. My first guess would be beads for the central slit, but it's hard to say. And I think that's kind of what's fun about archaeology. Sometimes you have to think things through and speculate or bounce ideas off of other people in order to come up with an answer. Less interestingly, but still of note, we found hundreds of hand-wrought nails in multiple survey areas that may have been from the time of the battle. Each of these nails is completely unique as they were handmade by a variety of smiths and used before machinery existed to create cut nails. As you can see, these vary widely in shape and style, and that is again due to the homemade nature of these nails. Back then, you couldn't go to a hardware store and buy a pack of nails. You had to make them yourself. Must have been the days, right? Finally, as for possibly battle-related artifacts, we have a variety of horse tack. We found many horseshoes as well, however, they were all dated to be past the era of the battle. Since we cannot confirm or deny whether the horse tack was from the battle or from a later period, I have decided to include them just as an interesting set of artifacts that we did recover. In addition to all the artifacts previously mentioned, we do have some assorted artifacts, some from the battle era and some not, that were honorable mentions. These include 20 horseshoes, a lock, a non-ferrous spoon, a variety of pottery sherds, as well as a plethora of wagon hardware. Of these, we have confirmed that the lock, spoon, and pottery are from the era of the battle. However, the wagon hardware is difficult to know without further testing. We know with reasonable certainty that horseshoes are not from the battle era based on academic sources, figures used as dating tools, and the thickness and curvature of the horseshoes. Sometimes we find interesting artifacts that are not related to our main body of research or the specific goals on the project. For example, we found this little pack of 1933 Springfield bus tokens, which is an interesting piece of more recent local history. So these are our preliminary results from our field survey of the Battle of Peckuwe in 1780. I know personally I feel very proud to have worked on the field work as well as the lab work for this project. I learned much more than I ever knew about the Revolutionary War in general, especially the role that the American Indians played within it. In addition, I think it shows the importance of the role the Midwest played in major historical events, and that amazing pieces of history may be hidden right in your own backyard waiting to be discovered. I hope you learned something from this experience. I know I did. We would like to acknowledge all the people and institutions that helped make this project possible and that have supported our research at Peckuwe. Thank you for watching, and I hope everyone has a great day.